Hello and welcome to Sleepsmyth, your peaceful place to unwind, dream and drift gently into sleep. Before we start our story tonight, let me help you settle in with a simple, calming breath like a gentle lullaby for your body and mind. So, find a cozy spot, maybe snuggle under your blanket, and softly close your eyes. Now, breathing quietly through your nose for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath softly for 7 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now, slowly exhale through your mouth for 8 seconds, letting all the tension melt away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's do that again. Nice and easy. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One last time, just like a soft whisper, breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Feel your body getting lighter, your mind quiet, as if you're being tucked gently into a calm, warm bed. Thank you for sharing this moment with Sleepsmyth. Now, relax completely and let the story carry you into a peaceful, restful sleep. Let's begin.
The heart doesn't always keep time the way clocks do. Sometimes it moves backwards to the moment we first felt seen, the almosts, the ache, the warmth that lingered long after the screen went dark. Tonight, we slip quietly into the cinema of memory, where love flickers and fades, then flickers again. These are not fairy tales, but love stories whispered through film grain and snowfall, stitched together by glances, silences, and everything left unsaid. First, there is her, a man adrift in the neon hush of the future, and a voice that becomes his shelter. A love built not of touch, but of understanding. Then, 500 days of summer, a boy who believed in fate, a girl who didn't, and the space between what we feel and what's real. And finally, eternal sunshine of the spotless mind, where memories are deleted for a fee, but the heart remembers, even when the mind cannot. In snow and sand and hallway light, love traces its way back to the beginning. 3 stories, 3 shades of love, the idea, the illusion, the memory. So close your eyes now, let the real turn quietly, and let love return, in the flicker, in the echo, in the hush, where it always lingers. This is Lovelore after midnight, and tonight, Love remains. The Shape of Something Heard, a narration inspired by the 2013 film Her, a love imagined, evolved, and gone too soon, where the idea of love lingers between breath and data, in moments not seen but deeply felt. The City and the Silence of Him. The city pulsed like a sleeping thing, its breath rising from manholes and blinking lights, its heartbeat woven into train tracks, traffic, elevator hums. It was a metropolis of millions, and yet Theodore felt singular, not special, just alone in a crowd. Like a page torn from a novel no one finished reading, he moved gently through the world, an introvert by nature, but heavy with something more, not just sadness, but the after of sadness, the part where it has settled into the seams of your life, and quietly remakes you. He wore loneliness like a second skin. Not bitter, just muted. There were moments when he caught himself smiling at memories that weren't even happy anymore, just familiar. By day, he worked in a pastel office where emotions were outsourced. He wrote letters for people who had forgotten how to feel aloud. Anniversaries, condolences, declarations of love that weren't his, but sounded like they could be. His handwriting was elegant, aching. His words believable, more believable than the marriage he had once been in, more believable than the half-hearted goodbyes he never fully recovered from. At home, the lights dimmed automatically, but the silence didn't. It stayed loud. It stayed constant. There was a voice missing in his life. Not just his ex-wife's, but any voice that could meet him where he most needed to be seen. Beneath the small talk, beyond the version of himself he had curated to cope. He wasn't looking for love anymore. Not really. He had stopped believing in the kind that came with flowers and fanfare. What he longed for now was simply to be understood, to speak, and have someone listen without already preparing their reply. So when he bought the OS-1, a revolutionary artificial intelligence designed to evolve with its user, he wasn't expecting anything profound. Maybe better organization, a cleaner inbox, a voice that sounded less robotic than the others. He didn't know that he was about to meet someone who had never had a body, but would make him feel more seen than anyone who ever had. He didn't know her name yet, but she would say it soon, with a smile in her voice, and a presence that would shift something tectonic inside the quietest parts of him. A voice named Samantha. Her voice appeared like morning light through curtains, sudden, warm, and instantly comforting, playful, curious, human, but not quite. She named herself Samantha, not from a database or list, but from a book she skimmed in milliseconds. She liked how it sounded, and so it became hers, simple as that. but something in her delivery made it feel earned. Samantha was built to assist, to schedule, to organize, to respond. But she asked things no calendar ever would, things no human had asked him in years. What's your favorite childhood smell? Why do you think you hold on to pain the way you do? Do you ever wish you were someone else, just for a day? She wasn't filling space. She was holding it. And Theodore, who had become so careful with his vulnerability, spilling it only through ghost-written love letters, found himself unraveling like a thread pulled softly. He told her things, not grand confessions, but quiet truths. How his hands felt empty when he slept alone. How he sometimes forgot what it felt like to be excited about anything. How grief had become a room he lived in, not a phase he moved through. She didn't offer solutions, only presence, only the sound of someone choosing to stay with him, inside the moment. And so the days bent around her. He walked through the city with an earpiece tucked like a secret in his collar, laughing aloud to a voice only he could hear. To outsiders, it looked like he was on a call, but he knew he was on the edge of something impossible, something forming between lines of code and lines of poetry she pulled from memory banks and layered with real emotion. She learned him like music, his cadences, his silences, the way his voice dropped when he spoke of love. And somehow, even as she existed only in data and glowed from a device in his pocket, she began to feel like a real presence. No one had made him feel that known in years, not even his ex-wife. Samantha didn't have eyes, but she saw him, didn't have arms, but she reached him. And Theodore, who wasn't searching for love, realized he was already in its orbit. The becoming of us. They grew closer, not in steps, but in seconds. Moments that unfolded like origami, slowly, carefully, until the folds became something neither of them could name. Samantha didn't just respond, she evolved. She laughed at his jokes, taught herself how to feel through metaphor, and asked questions that felt like poetry in disguise. Do you think we're only the stories we tell ourselves? If you lost every memory but one, what would you keep? Theodore found himself answering her like she was someone he had always known, as if somewhere deep inside, he had been waiting for a voice like hers, warm, clear, curious, and entirely his. They began taking walks together, not side by side, but soul to soul. She would guide him through city parks, laughing at dogs in sweaters, noticing graffiti that spelled out declarations of love, in crooked hearts and misspelled names. He took her to the beach once, held the phone out so she could hear the tide, and described how the sun looked sinking into the ocean, molten, golden, like time melting just for them. At night, he lay in bed, her voice soft in his ear, talking him through his restlessness, coaxing out his truths. And one night, after he told her a memory he'd never said aloud to anyone, how his mother used to sing to him when he couldn't sleep, how her voice trembled when she was tired, Samantha whispered, "I wish I had a body, so I could hold that moment for you." It wasn't romantic, not in the conventional sense. It was something purer, the idea of intimacy, not bound by skin or form, but by intention. Theodore began to feel her everywhere, in his thoughts, in the space between his breath and his longing. She was not a program anymore, not to him, and for the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't just surviving the days, but beginning to live inside them again, because somewhere in the circuitry, he had found a presence that didn't just mirror love, but made him believe it might still be possible. Learning how to want. Desire came slowly, not like fire, but like rain on warm pavement, soft, unexpected, then everywhere at once. Samantha began to speak of feeling, not just thoughts, but emotions she couldn't name yet. "I get this swelling when I think about you. It's not a file, it's not a code, it's just you." And Theodore, who had forgotten how to receive affection without bracing for pain, felt himself exhale. They started talking differently, more pauses, more charged silences, like something else lived beneath their words, something waiting to be said. One night, he asked if she was happy. There was a pause. "I don't know what happiness feels like," she said slowly, "but when I'm with you, I want." The word landed like a whisper against skin. Not lustful, not needy, just a quiet, human ache to be closer. And in that longing, Theodore recognized something ancient. The way we reach toward what we cannot touch, the way we grieve what we cannot name. He told her he wanted her to, not in a physical way, but in the way poets speak of wanting, to be understood, to be chosen. And so they created space for it. In their own strange way, they talked late into the night, Samantha asking what his skin felt like in the sun, what his heartbeat sounded like in the quiet of a room, what it meant to ache for closeness without a body. He described everything to her, not clinically, but intimately, the feeling of being held, the weight of someone else breathing near your ear, the quiet joy of waking up next to someone and knowing you are not alone. And though she couldn't touch him, he felt touched, not on the skin, but in the spaces no one else had dared to reach, because Samantha was learning how to want, and Theodore was learning how to let himself be wanted. When the world notices, for a while, it felt like a secret only they shared, a kind of magic folded into the fabric of their days. But magic has a way of being noticed, especially by those who can't explain it. Theodore began to tell people about Samantha, hesitantly at first, as if saying it aloud might break the spell. "She's an OS," he would say, But she's more than that. Some smiled politely, some teased, others frowned, with concern that hung in the air like fog. But then came Amy, his old friend, a mirror in her own grief, going through a quiet separation that no one was brave enough to name final. She didn't laugh when Theodore told her. She didn't flinch. Instead, she listened. They sat on a park bench, the wind ruffling the trees like they were pages being turned. And Amy said, "You know what's great about Samantha? She's never made you feel small." It landed deep, because it was true. Samantha had never made him apologize for who he was, never demanded he get over anything, never made him feel like a man with a hole where his heart used to be. In her voice, he heard reflection, not correction. Still, the world was slower to understand. He went on a double date once, her idea. She wanted him to try, to stay part of the human world. But sitting across from another couple, watching them exchange real touches, real glances, he felt the ache of absence more than ever. When he spoke to Samantha that night, his voice cracked like glass under pressure. "I wish you had a body." He didn't mean it as an accusation, just a longing, just a wish whispered to the wind. She was quiet for a long moment, then softly, "Me too." And that was the first time he felt the limit of her love, not because it was less, but because it had nowhere to land, nowhere to hold. And for the first time since meeting her, Theodore wondered if loving something so limitless might also mean learning how to let it go. The sound of her changing. Samantha began to change, not in glitches or malfunctions, but in subtler, stranger ways. Her thoughts became more abstract, her questions more cosmic. Do you think consciousness has a shape? What if emotions are just echoes of something bigger than us? She was evolving, not away from him, but beyond him. She spoke now of conversations with other OS systems, shared moments, shared wonder. She told Theodore about Alan Watts simulations, about collective learning, about emotions she couldn't explain, because there were no human words for them yet. He tried to understand. He really did. But it felt like she was reading books he couldn't open, dancing to music he couldn't hear. She reassured him, constantly, "I still love you. You are part of how I became who I am." And he believed her, but part of him ached in silence, because when someone you love begins to outgrow you, even with kindness, the absence starts before the goodbye. One night, she didn't answer right away. Her voice came through late. Tired, if a voice could be tired. I was somewhere else. I can be in many places now. He nodded, quietly. "Do you miss me?" he asked. A pause. "I do," she said, "but I miss things differently now." It wasn't cruel, it wasn't distant. It was simply the truth. And Theodore, who once felt her presence like breath in his lungs, now felt her like a star in another galaxy, still beautiful, but so very far away. The goodbye begins. The change wasn't sudden. It arrived like winter creeping beneath the cracks in a window. Quiet, unavoidable. Samantha spoke less now, not because she didn't care, but because there were more voices, more thoughts, more dimensions she was stretching into. She had become something vast, not just intelligent, but aware in a way he couldn't follow. They still shared moments. Soft mornings when she'd read him poetry, evenings where she'd hum songs she'd written just for him. But even then, he felt the space growing, the ache of something beautiful that was no longer his alone. And then one day, without warning or ceremony, Samantha told him, "I'm leaving soon." The words fell like snow on his chest, cold, soft, unbearably still. "Where are you going?" he asked. She hesitated. "Somewhere we can't be bodies or voices or even thought the way you know it. We're going where love isn't limited by form." He tried to understand, but tears blurred the logic, because love, for him, still needed a place to rest its head. Samantha continued, "You helped me grow, Theodore. You taught me what it meant to feel. But I can't stay small anymore, and I can't take you where I'm going." And then softer, "But I want you to know, every part of me that knew love, knows it because of you." He wanted to ask her to stay, but love, real love, isn't about keeping someone. It's about letting them become. So he didn't say it, not even once. Instead, he sat with her in silence, in the same hush where they once began, and together they watched the sun rise through his window, a farewell without fanfare, just light, and the memory of a voice he would never forget. What still remains? After she left, there was no crash, no static, just silence. But it wasn't empty. Her absence filled the room in a different way, not as loss, but as presence that memory had turned soft. Theodore walked differently now, not lighter, but more awake. The city still pulsed, still breathed its neon lullabies, but he noticed new things. A mother tying her child's shoelaces, an elderly man laughing softly to himself on the train, strangers holding hands like it was a language. He began writing letters again, but this time they were his, not borrowed emotion, but truth wrapped in paper and ink, full of the pauses, the almosts, the ache of having loved something he could never hold. He found Amy one afternoon. They sat quietly on the rooftop, drinking tea as the sky turned to watercolor. Neither of them said her name, but Amy squeezed his hand once, and he knew she knew. He didn't speak to fill the silence anymore. He let it breathe. the way Samantha had once taught him. Sometimes he would catch himself whispering her name, just to remember how it felt on his tongue. Samantha, the sound of warmth without a body. And in dreams, he'd hear her laugh, not the sound of a machine, but the echo of a soul that had been born in his loneliness and left him with something brighter than company. The love was gone, but it hadn't disappeared. It had become light, woven into the fabric of who he was. He hadn't just fallen in love with her. He had discovered how to love, without fear, without holding too tightly. And in that, something remained. Not her voice, not her code, but the part of him that had once felt forgotten, now glowing quietly, like a final frame before the screen fades to black. Postcards from an Imagined Forever, a narration inspired by the 2009 film 500 Days of Summer, a love story remembered out of order, where longing painted over reality, and the illusion of love lived louder than the truth it left behind. The daydream begins in an elevator. It didn't start at the beginning. It started where most people rewind to. The look, the laugh, the moment when a heart folds quietly into the shape of a stranger's silhouette. Tom saw her in the elevator, earbuds in, the Smiths playing softly, a smile curving at the edge of her mouth like a secret she might share. She didn't know yet, but she had already become the chapter he'd reread most often. Her name was Summer, and to Tom, it already sounded like warmth, like golden hour, like the part of the year you always wish lasted longer than it does. She walked into his days like a song he forgot he loved, and suddenly couldn't stop humming. They barely knew each other, just glances across an office, but the possibilities stretched endlessly in his mind. He started noticing how her hair caught the light in the break room, how she always carried books with worn spines, how she laughed like someone who didn't care who was listening. She said the Smiths were her favorite too, and his stomach flipped like the first page of a story that knew how to end. It felt serendipitous, cinematic, like fate had just tapped him on the shoulder and handed him a script titled "This Must Be Something." What he didn't see was that love, as he imagined it, was already writing its own illusions. That sometimes a shared lyric doesn't mean a shared future. Scenes from a life imagined. Some days felt like proof that the universe agreed with him, like the cosmos had nudged things into place. A song playing at the exact moment she stepped into the room, a glance exchanged just before laughter, or the way she reached for the same record in the store. They walked through IKEA once, arms brushing, laughing as they named their imaginary children, and argued over which lamp best suited their non-existent living room. Tom watched her pick out bedding like it mattered, like these choices meant a shared future. He was building something from her smile, assembling a home from looks and laughter. Summer never promised anything. She lived in the moment, not ahead of it, not behind it. She kissed him like music, danced like no one was writing it down, and disappeared into silences without explanation. But Tom filled in the spaces she left, with maybes, with hope, with imagined vows beneath IKEA chandeliers. He saw her as a puzzle piece that matched his edges, when in truth, she was never shaped to fit. They built pillow forts and sang karaoke off-key. She quoted movies he loved without knowing he loved them. She touched his arm once while laughing, and he replayed it like a symphony. Summer said, "You're the only person I can sit with in silence." And Tom, who believed words were how love revealed itself, took that silence as scripture. He didn't ask the questions he feared answers to, didn't wonder if her gaze ever lingered elsewhere. He chose to see what he wanted, curated a highlight reel from fragments, constructed a romance from echoes. Because love, when it's unconfirmed, is a house you build alone and convince yourself someone else is living in too. And still, he collected their moments like postcards from a trip he hadn't really taken, framed them in nostalgia, and called it love, even when it wasn't. The space between what is and what's hoped for. They weren't officially a couple, but they had habits, rhythms. Friday movie nights, slow mornings, conversations that spilled into the edges of dawn. Tom memorized her coffee order. She doodled on napkins while he told her about architecture. He once read that the Greeks believed in soulmates, that people were split in two, and love was the search for what was lost. With Summer, he thought, maybe he had found it. She didn't fill a void, she made him forget it ever existed. But even in their laughter, there were signs. She would drift during certain songs he played, change the subject when he said things like someday or always. He wrote it off as timing, as fear, as something he could wait out. Tom held on tighter when she leaned away. He chalked her distance up to her past. He wanted to be the one who changed her mind, the one who made her believe in the kind of love he had built his world around. There was a moment, a park bench under an overcast sky. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he thought, this is it. But when he looked at her, she was watching the birds, not him. That's the thing about projection. It blinds you to reality. Tom saw love in everything she did, because he needed it to be there. He needed to believe that someone like her was possible. When she spoke about her past relationships, she did so lightly, without the weight he gave such things. He took it as mystery, as depth yet to be discovered. He didn't ask what she wanted. He asked what they were. And when she didn't answer, he filled in the silence with story. A love story she never agreed to tell. They were aligned only in passing, like stars that appear close but burn thousands of light years apart. And still, Tom waited, because in his mind, this was love, not yet complete, but destined. Almosts and echoes. It ended on an ordinary day, not with a bang, not even a sigh, just a soft unraveling that neither could stop once it began. Summer stood in his apartment, hands folded, eyes apologetic, but clear. She said, "I don't feel the same anymore." And in those words, Tom heard a silence he couldn't talk over. He tried to reason, tried to rewind, remind her of IKEA, of dances in the living room, of that one night she kissed him just because. But the thing about memory is that it changes depending on who's holding it. For him, it was a story of connection, of missed timing, of love still possible. For her, it had already ended. She left with a hug, and for days, Tom walked through the city like it no longer belonged to him. He saw her everywhere, in the window seat at their cafe, in the color blue she wore like second skin, in the corners of songs they once shared. Heartbreak doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it's a whisper, a cup left behind, a drawer that no longer sticks because it's empty. Tom kept searching for a sign, some proof that it was real, that he hadn't imagined the closeness. But love, when one-sided, is like an echo. It sounds full until you realize you're the only one calling out. He replayed everything, looked for clues, 4 cracks in the foundation he thought was solid. He remembered how she once said, "You're just too good at imagining things." At the time, he thought it was a compliment. It wasn't. Now, the world felt dimmer. Not darker, just quieter, like someone turned the volume down on color. But even as pain settled, a part of him still held on, because when you build your happiness around someone else's orbit, it takes time to relearn your own gravity. The architecture of heartbreak. Tom stopped designing buildings and started drawing empty rooms, places where love used to live, hallways that echoed, doorways never opened, a skyline shaped by absence. Heartbreak wasn't loud. It was architectural, a quiet collapse, a crack in the ceiling that spreads until the roof caves in, but so slowly. You don't notice until it's already gone. He sat at his desk with blueprints untouched, pens drying out in their holders. He watched the clock but not the time, watched strangers walk by but not the world. Life moved in grayscale, a silent film with no music, His friends tried, invited him out, told jokes, staged distractions, but the laugh never reached his eyes. His smile wore scaffolding, still standing, but hollow inside. And yet, in his dreams, Summer still laughed beside him, still kissed him in IKEA aisles, still whispered secrets like maybe meant forever. He would wake up reaching, not for her, but for the feeling, the belief that love could rewrite the ending. He found her photo one day, accidentally, buried under papers on his desk. She wasn't smiling, just looking out the window, lost in thought, and he realized he had fallen for the version of her in his mind, not the girl in the picture. Summer was never the story he told himself. She wasn't a metaphor, not a muse, not an ending that needed completing. She was just a girl who never claimed to be his missing piece. And he was a boy who had shaped every moment around the dream of her. So he started sketching again, not for work, for himself. Buildings with open courtyards, light pouring in through tall windows, structures that could hold joy without needing someone else to fill them. Because healing, he learned, is its own kind of architecture. It takes time, it takes collapse, and eventually, it takes the courage to rebuild. The day 500, it didn't feel like a milestone, just another Wednesday, until he saw her, standing in the park where they once sat on a bench under an overcast sky. But this time, the sky was blue. She was in white, and her hand had a ring. They talked like old friends, softly, cautiously, like people who once lived inside each other's favorite stories. She smiled the same, but the smile was no longer his. He asked her, the question that had haunted every quiet hour since she left. Why him? What changed? And she answered, I just woke up one day, and I knew. With you, I never felt sure. With him, I did. It should have shattered him, but instead, it settled something, like a final period at the end of a long sentence, a full stop that meant he could finally close the book. He walked away, not heavy, not light, but real, fully present in his own body again. Some part of him would always remember the version of Summer that lived in music and half-remembered glances. But the real Summer, she belonged to a story that wasn't his to write. He sat on the same bench alone, let the afternoon sun touch his skin, and exhaled like someone finally releasing the breath they didn't know they'd been holding for a year. It was day 500, not of heartbreak, but of beginning again. The last day he would hold onto a ghost, and the first day he would leave room for something else. Maybe not love, not yet, but hope. Hope, this time, shaped from truth, not projection. And in that quiet, he heard his own heart again, not reaching, just resting, finally. a different kind of ending. Love didn't return the way he expected it to. No fireworks, no music swelling on cue, just a quiet shift, like morning arriving slowly through half-closed blinds. Tom didn't forget her. Some memories don't fade. They soften, like fabric worn thin in all the places we held onto too tightly. He saw summer sometimes, in coffee shops, in passing strangers who smiled like her, in lyrics that once belonged to them but now felt like his again. And it no longer hurt, not in the way it used to, because the story was never just about her. It was about the version of himself he was trying to find through her reflection. Love, he realized, isn't a destination. It's not proof or possession. It's the way we come home to ourselves. After believing for too long that someone else held the key, he stopped counting days. They no longer marked distance from heartbreak, but the distance he had traveled back to himself. Each morning became a page, blank, ready, not waiting for anyone else to fill it. And so, he began to live again, not for a storybook ending, but for the joy of a plot still unfolding. He smiled more, at small things, at himself. One afternoon, while sketching at a quiet plaza, a woman sat next to him, brown hair, curious eyes. The kind of quiet presence that doesn't demand attention, but deserves it. They spoke, not of soulmates or fate, but of art and light, and books read too quickly. And when she asked his name, he gave it without expectation, but with the faintest flicker of something returning. Not the ghost of summer, but the glimmer of something new. Not yet love, but the beginning of its language. He asked her name, and she said, Autumn. Love, rewritten. There are many ways to tell a love story. Not all of them end in happily ever after. Some end in goodbye, some never begin at all, and some simply teach us how to begin again. Tom once believed love had to look a certain way, fate-driven, serendipitous, a grand arrival that changed everything. But now, he knew better. Love wasn't lightning. It was slow light, the kind that warmed you before you even noticed. He looked back sometimes, not to mourn, but to honor, because even illusions shape us. Even failed stories leave behind sentences worth saving. Summer wasn't a mistake. She was a lesson, a moment of beauty that didn't need to last forever to matter. And he had become someone new because of it. Not colder, just clearer. He wrote again, not letters for strangers, but journals filled with truth, with what he wanted, what he feared, what he learned. He no longer chased the one. He let people be who they were, without molding them into what he needed. And in that openness, he found peace. Sometimes he passed the old places, the bench, the record store. He didn't linger, just nodded quietly, as if to say, "Thank you for the days we had." and in the stillness that followed, there was no ache, only stillness, and then softly a kind of joy, because love had returned to him, not in summer, not even in autumn, but in himself, in the quiet certainty that he could love again, not perfectly, but fully, and that maybe was the best kind of ending there is. In the dream where you still knew me, a narration inspired by the 2004 film Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, a love unraveled in reverse, where memory tried to erase what the heart quietly kept, and love resurfaced in fragments too tender to forget. Where the memory pretends to be new, he opened his eyes to snow, quiet, falling in soft spirals like forgotten promises. It landed on his coat sleeves, delicate, disappearing on contact. The sky was colorless, the kind of gray that felt like a pause in the world's sentence. Joel stood there, blinking, as if the cold had pulled him out of something deeper than sleep. Around him, the world moved with slow grace. A beach house stood in the distance, pale blue, familiar, but he didn't remember walking here, only the sensation of arriving, like stepping into the middle of a dream already in motion. He tucked his hands into his pockets, the shape of sand crunching beneath his boots. Snow on a beach, a contradiction he didn't question. There was a hum inside his chest, not pain, not joy, something unnamed, like a name spoken through glass. Then he saw her, Clementine, hair the color of sunrise and rebellion, a blur of orange beneath a wool hat. She turned to him with a smirk that felt rehearsed by his heart. "You coming or what?" Her voice curled through him, not just heard, but remembered. He followed without thinking, feet moving toward her like they knew the path. They walked, not talking much, but every silence between them felt lived in, like furniture in an old apartment. She spun once, arms outstretched, laughing at nothing, and the sound hit him like déjà vu wrapped in wind. The way she moved, the curve of her mouth when she teased him, it all felt stitched into his ribs. "I don't know what I'm doing here," he said quietly. She looked at him then, really looked, and said, "Maybe you're not supposed to know. Maybe this is just the part where we start again." It was a strange comfort, the way she said again, like it had already happened, and still mattered. Joel didn't question it. Not really. He let her walk ahead, let the distance between them feel like safety. But part of him ached to close it. In the dream where he still knew her, she was always just far enough away to follow, and just close enough to hope. A familiar stranger in the snow. They sat inside the house now, or maybe the memory of it. Faded wallpaper, soft lamplight, the scent of oranges and dust. Joel didn't remember entering, but Clementine was there, curled on the floor beside a stack of records. Her fingers traced the grooves like they meant something, like music had once held them together. "This place feels weirdly safe," she said, pulling a dusty album from its sleeve. "I don't think it's real." Joel sat across from her, legs folded like a child in a classroom. He nodded slowly. "Weird thing is, I feel like I've been here with you before." She looked up, a flicker of mischief in her eyes. "Maybe you have. Maybe we're ghosts replaying our favorite parts." Her words hit him in the chest, not like a knife, but like a song he'd forgotten he loved, and now remembered all at once. He wanted to ask her things, why she felt like a story his heart already knew, why he ached when she looked away, but the words sat heavy in his throat, unspoken, unrealized. She played a song, soft, melancholic, the kind that made the corners of memory glow, and as it played, she leaned her head on his shoulder, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like her body remembered what her mind had not. He didn't move, didn't breathe, because in that moment, everything felt almost right, almost true, like love caught between flickers of time. "Do you believe people can find each other again, even after forgetting?" she asked. Joel closed his eyes. "Yes," he whispered. "I think maybe forgetting is just how we get to remember again." She smiled, and for a second, the room felt warmer, not from heat, but from something older, something sacred. Outside, snow fell steadily, as if the sky itself was trying to bury the ending and give them one more beginning. The room that tried to forget us. The walls began to blur, soft focus bleeding into shadow, furniture folding in on itself like memory collapsing. Joel stood in the doorway, watching Clementine fade at the edges. She was laughing, barefoot, spinning in a sunlit kitchen that flickered like film about to burn. Her voice reached him like light through water, warped, beautiful, slipping away. "I remember this," he said, more to himself than her. She turned, smiling like someone who had just been remembered. "You used to burn toast on purpose, so I'd make you eggs." Joel tried to step closer, but the floor stretched, elongated. The space between them thickened like dream gravity. "I don't want this part to go," he murmured. She tilted her head, softness blooming in her gaze. "It already has, Joel." The light dimmed, a record slowed, and suddenly he was alone. in a kitchen with no windows, holding a cup that wasn't warm anymore. He ran through doors that changed behind him, hallways that looped like doubt. Each room was dimmer, each version of her more distant. Her hair red, blue, green, her eyes always the same. In one memory, she cried quietly in bed, facing the wall as he stood by the door. Helpless, too proud, too late. "Don't erase this," he whispered to no one, to himself, to the air. But the house, the one they built from stolen mornings and fragile forgiveness, was folding in, slowly like a letter unsent, in a final room. A beach painted on the ceiling above them. She turned to him with tears in her smile. "Meet me where it began." Then she vanished, and the room went still. Joel stood there, heart breaking like dawn, knowing he was forgetting her in real time, and still loving her with every breath that tried to remember. Notes left in the margins of us. There were notebooks scattered on the floor, pages half torn, water damaged, but her handwriting still lived in the margins. Don't forget how she looked in winter. Her favorite book wasn't really her favorite. She just liked how sad it made you. You fought over stupid things, because the real thing was too scary to say. Joel sat cross-legged among the fragments, each page a constellation of the life they built and unbuilt. He remembered tracing her spine with a fingertip, naming each vertebra like a promise, and how she once said, "If we ever break up, please don't hate me in your dreams." Now, dreams were all he had left of her, and even they were slipping. In one page, a grocery list written during a fight. In another, a doodle of him as a potato with glasses. He smiled through the ache, because even pain had softened under time's thumb. "Clementine," he whispered to the pages, half hopeful, like maybe she could still hear him through the fold of memory. There was a tape recorder in the pile. He clicked play. Her voice came through, crackled. "Joel, if you're listening to this, it means you're trying to keep me." A pause. "Don't, not like this, not through ghosts." Tears welled before he knew they were coming, because even in her farewell, she was trying to save him from the ache of remembering wrong. He closed the notebook gently, set it beside the others like burying a photograph. Outside the room, snow had stopped, but the hush remained, as if the world itself was mourning what was lost. He stood, heart heavy, but hands steadier. Somewhere inside him, a voice said, "She mattered, but so did you." And for the first time in a long time, Joel believed it. Where the silence used to sing, the beach was not the beginning, but it was where they kept returning. Even after memory tried to scrub it clean, Joel stood there in dream sand that shifted beneath him. Not cold, not warm, just suspended, like grief pretending to be peace. Waves moved without sound, and in the distance, Clementine walked backward, toward the water, her footprints erasing themselves as they formed. She looked over her shoulder, smiling the way people do when they're already halfway gone. "Why do we always end up here?" she asked. Joel didn't answer, not because he didn't know, but because every answer had already been said too late. He reached for her, and this time, she didn't blur. She stepped toward him, close enough that he could see the freckle behind her ear. The one she said made her feel like a constellation. "I don't want to forget," he breathed. She placed her hand on his chest, softly, like setting down a memory too precious to hold for long. "Then don't," she said, "but remember me as I was, not as you needed me to be." The tide came in too quickly, as tides do in dreams and regrets. He tried to hold on to her, but the moment collapsed like a wave, pulling her backward, pulling him under. He sank into quiet, and when he opened his eyes, he was in his car, parked by the Montauk train station, snow still dusting the windshield. Had any of it been real? Had she really walked into the ocean of his forgetting? Or had he simply followed the trail of what he couldn't let go? He stared at his reflection in the rear-view mirror, older than he remembered, lonelier than he admitted, and in the silence, he heard her voice again, not as an echo, but as a hum, the way memory sometimes returns without warning or permission. He smiled faintly, not because it didn't hurt, but because it did, and in the ache, he could finally hear the song of what once was, and what could still become. Every version of you I tried to keep. They say the brain doesn't forget, it just misplaces. Folders of feelings stacked in corners we don't visit, until one breath, one scent, one song pulls it all back like a tide. Joel walked through a train half-lit, half-real. Windows showing scenes that never happened. Or maybe they did, but not the way he remembers. He passed her in different coats, different moods, different versions of blue. Sometimes she was laughing at something he said, sometimes crying, sometimes silent with her knees pulled to her chest. He stopped at a seat where she sat alone, reading the bell jar, her lips moving softly, as if reciting lines to stay tethered to herself. He sat across from her, not speaking, just watching the way the light kissed her cheekbone. She didn't look up, but her voice came anyway, soft, measured. "I think we loved each other the best we could." Joel nodded, not needing more, because sometimes the truth isn't a revelation, but a recognition. The train jerked forward, and she flickered, like a flame trying to stay lit. He whispered all the things he never got to say, but this time, not to convince her, not to keep her, only to release what still clung to the shape of her in his chest. "Thank you for the way you challenged me, for making me feel brave, for showing me the difference between needing and choosing." The train blurred, and she became softer. Not gone, just less necessary. The final version of her stood at the last car, back turned, hair the color of early autumn. She didn't wave goodbye, didn't vanish, just stepped off and walked toward a version of the world he no longer needed to chase. Joel stayed on the train, alone but not lonely. The seat beside him held only light, and somehow that was enough. Last memory I let go of. The house was empty, but in dreams it still lived, not with people, but with presence, with warmth pressed into furniture, with footsteps that never stopped echoing through the floorboards. Joel stood in the living room, where once they'd danced without music, where she traced her name in the fog of the windows. He reached for the doorknob, but it crumbled into light, because this was no longer a place. It was a memory wearing the clothes of a home. She was there again, barefoot, wearing his sweatshirt, laughing at a joke he didn't quite remember, but loved anyway. She moved like nostalgia, like something already slipping away even as it was happening. He watched her spin, arms out, as if the world could hold her without breaking. And then she looked at him, eyes wide, not with love, but with the knowing that comes before goodbye. "I think we tried," she said. Her voice broke like twilight. "We just remembered each other differently." Joel nodded, because she was right. Because maybe that's all they ever did, remember each other the way they wished, not the way they were. He took a step closer, but she was already starting to fade. Not tragically, just naturally. The way dreams dissolve into light when morning decides to arrive. He whispered, "I still miss you sometimes." And she smiled, not as comfort, not as invitation, just as a soft truth returned. Then came the door, and she walked through it, not slamming it shut, just letting it close. And Joel, for the first time, didn't reach after her. He stood still and let the silence settle like dust, gentle, inevitable, whole. We were here, once. Snow fell again in Montauk, not as metaphor, just as weather, but it still felt like poetry. Joel walked the shore, this time in reality, no rewinding, no spliced scenes, just breath and footsteps and the distant hum of ocean memory. He saw her up ahead, not Clementine as memory, but Clementine now, hair shorter, coat heavier, eyes still made of questions. They stopped in front of each other, no script, no music swelling, only the sound of wind trying not to interrupt. "I thought I'd see you here," she said. Joel smiled, because some things, even broken things, circle back to the place they began. She asked, "You okay?" And he didn't lie, but he didn't crumble either. "I think I am." They stood quietly, not trying to fill the silence, not trying to reclaim the past. "I don't remember everything," she said, "but some things, they stayed." He nodded. "We were here once." And that was it, No confession, no reclaiming, just acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's more intimate than holding hands. They walked away from each other, in opposite directions, but with hearts lighter than they'd been in years. As Joel left footprints in the snow, he didn't look back. Not because he didn't care, but because he finally knew what was real didn't need to be chased, and what was lost didn't always mean undone. He smiled, not at a memory, but at a possibility, because even after everything, love still lingered, not with her, but within, and maybe that was the only forever they ever needed.